So I made a speculation video about this a few weeks back, and since then it has been confirmed to be true. Vinland Saga has only one chapter left. There's not going to be a chapter this month. It's a hiatus for the month of June and July, probably the 24th, 25th, 26th, whenever it comes out and we get a translation. That is going to be the definitive, official, confirmed final chapter of Vinland Saga, which just seems crazy to me because I feel like there's so much more to do and so much more to say. But Yukimura has been telling his story steadily for the better part of a decade, and it is time to finally come to a conclusion. So I have trust and faith in him as a writer to wrap his story up the way that he wants to and deliver that final epilogue to us after so many years. I first became a Vinland fan probably about 5 or 6 years ago. So relatively new, I guess, but I have been, absolutely enamored with this series. I think it's fantastic. Huge fan of it. And with that, there are some loose ends. There are many loose ends, but there's some particular loose ends that I want to see a conclusion for. So this video is going to be the top 5 things that I want to see in the final chapter of Vinland Saga. Now, these are not predictions. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I'm just saying these are 5 things that stand out to me personally that I want to see somehow incorporated in the next chapter. And they're also in no particular order. So the first one here is a confrontation with Thorfinn and Gyaoki. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but he is the native that now is in possession of the sword that Ivyar brought to Vinland. Now, when I say confrontation, I don't necessarily mean a full, drawn, blown-out fight scene. Because obviously Thorfinn is doing everything in his power that he can to not have to fight. If the situation calls for it, he will be defensive, but he's trying his best to live by what he says, live by his own philosophy. However, I feel like it would be massively out of character for Thorfinn to just leave a sword here in Vinland, because the poison has already begun to take effect, as the allure of the sword has been something that the series has talked about ever since the very beginning. I always point out the scene where Thorfinn pulls his father's knife out of the chest and looks at it, and it gleams, it glows, it glistens, and he's feeling the potential and the power of having a weapon like that. And that's the same thing that can be reflected with the sword, and that's the same reason why a true warrior needs no sword is one of the more famous quotes from the series, because it's like, how do you solve this conflict without the use of a sword, as well as implementing a sword into a society, into a culture, will no doubt draw people to want to use it. Whether they say it's for defense or not, they're going to be kind of subtly hoping, as Ivyar did, somewhere in the back of their mind, that they're going to get a chance to use it. So if Thorfinn leaves this here, they will probably try to replicate it. They will probably try to find any situation they can to use it, and could cause way more devastation. And Thorfinn is the main character that has been talking about this allure of the sword this entire time, ever since the farm arc. So I feel like it would not make sense for Thorfinn to just say, okay, yeah, you guys can have that, and then I'm going to leave. And if Thorfinn does go to try to get the sword back, obviously Gyaoki, or somebody tell me how to pronounce his name, but obviously he's not going to want to give it back. So that would cause a final conflict, a final confrontation in the manga, which could go in any possible direction. The only justification I could think for Thorfinn just letting that be is because he's so distraught and torn up about the death of Einar. Yeah, spoilers, by the way, if you're watching this video. So torn up about Einar that maybe in that moment he just doesn't care. But I feel like there has to be something there. There has to be something about that. The sword has gone into the wrong hands. In this case, the hands of anybody. And I feel like Thorfinn has to take the sword back or destroy the sword in some way. So that's the first one. The next one is going to be Thorfinn actually meeting his child. So Thorfinn has had a son. Gudrid gave birth in our real time like 2 years ago in the story, not that long ago. But he has yet to meet his son Snorri. And I feel like that is something that should probably happen. I also feel like the idea of lineage and passing things on to the next generation is a very strong aspect of the story. It isn't just their, the culture of the time to begin with. Everybody introduces themselves by saying, I am the son of blank. But I think that this story is very important in that aspect because you see the teachings of Thor's going down to Thorfinn. And of course, it took a while for those teachings to kind of settle in, but Thor's didn't have everything perfectly figured out. And Thorfinn doesn't have everything perfectly figured out. Not one person can. But I think that showing Thorfinn meeting his child and maybe, eventually instilling some lessons upon him leading to the next generation, we kind of have Carly to represent that in a way, but I think just the idea of Thorfinn actually meeting his biological child is a very important thing for, well, anybody that would have a child, but also for this story. And I think that that is something that I really would love to see happen, is to have Thorfinn finally be able to actually hold his child. The third thing I want to see is some kind of resolution to other classic characters that we have not seen for a long time. So because of the nature of the story and it taking place in Vinland in the time period it does, there are many, many, many other characters that have been left behind that we haven't seen for a very long time and don't really know much of what they're up to. And if we do, it's just tiny little breadcrumbs. I'd say the two biggest that are the most likely for Yukimura to touch on are Canute and Thorkell. Both of those have been extremely important to the story at different parts, and Canute has been touched on a little bit in the Vinland arc. He did have a chapter to kind of show what he was up to at the time, but Canute was so important in the first two arcs of Vinland Saga, which I still personally think are the two best arcs of the story. And his absence, although I think the story does very well at taking important characters out and still managing to be very compelling and moving forward. Like, the fact that you could kill Askeladd off and still have the series be great is a massive feat. But taking Canute out of the story, I mean, it does feel like there's something missing. I understand that it doesn't really fit into where the story's at right now, but some kind of resolution for his character, I think, is kind of desperately needed. Thorkell, maybe not as much, but still a very prominent force in the first arc of the series and in the Baltic Sea section too. So seeing where Thorkell is right now would be interesting, and if there's any sort of like montage of where characters are at, I think those two are the most likely. Now, there's a handful of other characters that I would love to see more of, that I think are less likely, but those are Snake, Sigurd, and Garm. I love all three of those characters. They are all still alive, off on whatever journey that they're on. I think it's less likely that he would touch on those characters. Sigurd's arc seems pretty well wrapped up, although I still would like to see where he's at right now. Garm was one of my all-time favorite characters, and I hated losing him in the story, but I'd like to see what happened to him after his last confrontation with Thorfinn, who he thinks is his friend because of their shared experience. And Snake, obviously, he's always been a mystery and enigma of sorts, but where did Snake end up after the farm incident? I always wanted to know that. So I doubt those characters would ever be touched on again, but just my hope that maybe the final chapter might show us a panel or two of where they are now. For the number 4 thing I would like to see, it is a time skip. What this entails, I don't really have any specifics, but I would like to see further into the future. I think if I had to narrow it down, in particular, I would like to see Carly and Thorfinn's actual child, Snorri, grown up, or maybe, around the same age as Thorfinn was in the first arc, the majority of the first arc. I would like to see them be, capable, functioning human beings that are now taking the lessons of Thorfinn and maybe doing things a little bit differently, still instilling the knowledge that he passed down to them, but doing it in their own way, similar to how Thorfinn took the lessons of Thor's and now did it in his own way. I imagine they would be like siblings, growing up, and both technically the child of Thorfinn, one adopted, one biological, but even if Thorfinn isn't there, they're going to grow up in that community, they're going to grow up with Gudrid being their mother, so they're going to be siblings. And what I think would be interesting is if we saw a parallel with them, paralleling Thorfinn and Einar's relationship. If we saw Carly and Snorri kind of like shaking hands in front of the grave of Einar, or in front of the grave of Thorfinn, maybe, kind of vowing to take that next step and going that next extra mile. If they could sort of like be the new Thorfinn and Einar, but maybe not make the same mistakes. But that kind of brings me to my final thing I would like to see, and don't take this the wrong way, but I would like to see the death of Thorfinn. Now, whether that means that happens in the time skip or not, that's fine. I think it would be poetic in the sense that Vinland Saga is pretty much the story of Thorfinn, starting with him. We don't see his birth, but we see him as a small child, and we follow his entire life with all of these significant events. Each arc of Vinland Saga can be broken down into a different era of his life. You know, we see him younger as a mercenary, and then we see him a little bit older and at the farm being a slave, a little bit older than that, and then in the Vinland arc, you know, he's kind of become very, very well seasoned. So I would like to see sort of this final culmination of the story of Thorfinn. And to do that, I think it would be poetic to leave with Thorfinn's death. Now, maybe Thorfinn will die before that. Maybe he will die. Maybe he won't get home. Maybe he will never see his child. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, he might die now. He might die later. We might get a final panel of his grave. I don't know. But I would like to see like an entire, you know, life story of a character. I think there's something interesting. I think there's something poetic in that if you read Vinland Saga, you're reading the life of Thorfinn. And the final thing that happens in life is death. So yes, I would like to see Thorfinn's death in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just from a time skip at the end of Vinland Saga. So there you go, guys. Those are the top 5 things that I hope to see in the finale of Vinland Saga. Not predictions, just personal bias of things that I just want to see in the story. So let me know what you guys think or what you want to see in the final chapter of Vinland Saga. Yes, it has been confirmed at this point. At the end of July, Vinland Saga will be over. So let me know what you guys want to see in the final chapter, and maybe because it's the final chapter, it's something special. Maybe I'll do like a live reaction of the chapter. I don't really like doing live reactions that often, but sometimes if it calls for it, you know, if it's a special event, maybe that's the way to go. So I might make a video reading it live for the first time. I don't know. But let me know what you guys think, and let me know what you want to see in the final chapter. And until then, I'll see you next month.